Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. You wake up before dawn, not because you have to, because hundreds of people are already standing outside your door. Not protesters, not enemies, merchants, lawyers, poets, soldiers, senators, all of them waiting in the dark, rehearsing what they're going to say, calculating how to smile at exactly the right moment. This happened every single morning if you were rich in ancient Rome. It sounds like power. To the Romans, it was also a warning. Because wealth in the ancient world wasn't something you enjoyed, it was something you had to perform every single day or risk losing everything. The morning ritual was called the salutatio. Before sunrise, clients gathered outside the home. People whose livelihoods, legal cases, and social survival depended entirely on the man inside. They waited in the cold, they rehearsed, they competed with each other for position in the line. When the doors opened, the wealthy man walked through them like a small king holding court in his robe. He dispensed gifts called sportuli, baskets of food, coins, small favors. He listened to requests. He made promises. He performed generosity with the precision of someone who understood exactly what generosity was worth. Then the doors closed, and the next morning it started again, every day, for the rest of his life. The homes of the ancient wealthy were not places to relax. They were arguments made in stone. A Roman senator's domus was engineered to make visitors feel the right things in the right order. You entered through a narrow corridor deliberately confining that suddenly opened into a vast atrium. A central hall with a pool in the floor, open to the sky above, light flooding in from overhead. The jaw drop was not accidental. It was the architecture doing its job. Beyond that came the tablanum, the master's office, where business was conducted in full view of anyone waiting. Then the peristyle garden, with its columns and fountains and plants arranged with obsessive precision. Beyond that, the dining rooms, the libraries, the private baths, and tucked into every corner of this engineered world, in small windowless cells without ventilation, the people who made it run. The historian Pliny records a Roman named Caecilius Isidorus who, even after suffering significant financial losses, still left more than 4,000 slaves in his will. More than 4,000 human beings listed as property in a document about the disposal of property. Every bath drawn, every meal prepared, every toga cleaned, every guest received and seated, every lamp refilled, every message carried across the city, performed by people whose names history never found worth recording. The entire architecture of ancient luxury, physical, social, psychological, was built on a foundation that is almost impossible to fully romanticize from where we sit. Now, let's talk about the food, because the food tells you something important. A Roman banquet, the cena was not a meal. It was a demonstration. Guests reclined on couches arranged around low tables. You did not sit at a Roman dinner if you were important. Sitting was for servants and people eating in the street. Reclining was the physical posture of arrival. It communicated through the angle of your body that you were someone. The dishes that followed were designed not primarily to be eaten, but to be witnessed. The cookbook attributed to Apicius Rome's closest equivalent to a culinary Bible describes dormice stuffed with pork and pine nuts, snails fed on milk until they were too fat to withdraw into their shells, and sea urchins served with the fermented fish sauce that apparently went on everything in Rome. None of these things were particularly delicious. The point was that acquiring them had been difficult, that their presence on your table proved something about your reach, your connections, your importance. But the most precise social signal at any Roman dinner party wasn't the food, it was the wine. Wine was served in different qualities to different guests at the same table, at the same dinner. The best vintage for the most important guest. Increasingly diluted pours moving down the social hierarchy. One ancient source describes a host who served 3 different tiers of wine to 3 different categories of guests simultaneously. The guests at the bottom noticed. They always noticed. That was the point. Every element of a Roman dinner communicated exactly where everyone stood. There was no casual, there was no just friends having dinner. Every detail was a legible message about rank, and rank was the only currency that ultimately mattered. Here's where it turns. Underneath all of it, the morning crowds, the engineered atrium, the tiered wine, the thousands of slaves was something the Roman philosopher Seneca captured in a single observation. The rich, he wrote, were often the most anxious people he knew. Think about that for a moment. Seneca understood why, and so would you if you understood what ancient wealth actually meant to keep. There was no limited liability in Rome, no bankruptcy protection, No safety net of any kind. If your ships sank, you were ruined. If you fell out of political favor, and political favor was volatile, personal, and entirely dependent on people you couldn't fully control, your property could be confiscated overnight. If the emperor decided he liked your house was gone by morning. The wealthy of antiquity were acutely, constantly aware of how quickly everything could disappear, which means every banquet they threw, every gift they gave to clients, every gladiatorial game they sponsored, every marble column they commissioned, none of it was vanity. It was insurance, the maintenance of loyalty, the purchase of goodwill, the slow, expensive accumulation of relationships that just might, protect you when things went wrong. Julius Caesar, before he became Julius Caesar, nearly bankrupted himself funding gladiatorial games. He reportedly inherited a collection of more than 300 pairs of gladiators, an inheritance that would have been considered a serious political asset in Rome, not a luxury. Because in Rome, spectacle was not separate from ambition. Spectacle was ambition. You spent money. The crowd cheered. The crowd voted. You accumulated power. You spent more money. The lions kept dying. The crowds kept coming. The cycle kept turning. And the man at the center of it was not relaxing. He was calculating, managing, performing the most exhausting theater imaginable. The Stoic philosophy, so fashionable among Roman elites, inner peace regardless of circumstance. The truly wise man, unbothered by external chaos, was not an idle intellectual exercise. It was a psychological technology built for the specific stress of having everything in a world where everything could be taken. They needed it. Romans feared losing their status in life. Egyptians feared losing it after death. The anxiety was different. The solution was completely different too. Wealthy ancient Egyptians dealt with this terror by spending their entire adult lives preparing for what came next. Building the tomb, stocking it, hiring priests to maintain the mortuary cult that would sustain their spirit in the afterlife. This is often described as morbidity. It was not. It was estate planning of the most rigorous kind imaginable. The most important asset a wealthy Egyptian owned was not their land or their gold. It was their relationship with the bureaucracy of death. Getting it right, the prayers, the rituals, the tomb, the grave goods calibrated to signal exactly the right status in whatever came next was the entire project. The construction of royal and elite tombs consumed decades of coordinated labor and resources on a scale few individuals in any era of history could match. Ramesses II began building his mortuary complex the moment he took the throne. He reigned for 67 years. He was still adding to it when he died at 90. He did not consider this excessive, he considered it prudent. Because in ancient Egypt, the thing the wealthy feared most was not poverty, not political disgrace, not even death itself. It was being forgotten, having your name removed from your monuments, losing the tomb that would sustain you, being erased from the record. The wealthy of ancient Egypt built enormous because enormous lasted. They inscribed their names on every surface because names were survival. All of it was terror, managed architecturally. Here's what connects all of this: Rome, Egypt, the mourning crowds, the tiered wine, the tombs, the slaves. Being wealthy in the ancient world meant performing wealth completely, publicly, and without pause. The toga, that unwieldy 6-meter length of wool that required trained assistants to fold and drape correctly, was not just clothing. It was the most visible possible proof that you had people to help you get dressed. You physically could not put a toga on alone. The garment was architecturally dependent on other human beings, which was, of course, exactly what it was designed to communicate. Rich Romans were also known for walking slowly and deliberately through the streets. Rushing was for people with places they needed to be. If you had truly arrived, you moved like someone with nowhere they needed to go because your entire purpose was simply to be witnessed existing. Power in the ancient world was not quiet, not private, not restful. It was theater, total, relentless, consequence-laden theater. And the performers, the senators conducting their morning audiences, the generals funding their spectacles, the pharaohs building their tombs, the merchants maintaining their divine patron-god relationships, all of them understood something that modern wealth sometimes forgets. Having everything is not the same as keeping it. And keeping it requires a performance so total, so consuming, so committed to its own continuation every single morning before sunrise that the people waiting in the streets sometimes had the better deal. The ancient wealthy had one thing, though, that no amount of modern money can fully replicate: time. Not leisure exactly, Exactly. They were exhaustingly busy, but they controlled their time in a way almost no one else did. A wealthy Roman could spend an entire afternoon reading, arguing philosophy with friends, walking his estate, and thinking about nothing in particular. The ancient world had no productivity culture, no optimization, no hustle. Just, for those who could afford it, the extraordinary luxury of existing entirely on your own schedule. The Greeks had a word for this, skol, the word we get school from, which tells you something about how they understood free time. Skol wasn't laziness, it was the condition that made everything important possible. Philosophy, art, politics, friendship, athletic excellence. You needed free time to be fully human in the Greek sense, and free time was something only money could purchase. Everyone else was working, so what was it actually like to be rich in the ancient world? It was beautiful, and violent, and fragrant, and anxious. It was staffed by thousands of people whose suffering made it possible. It was architecturally engineered to perform its own power at every moment. It was a theater that never closed, a performance conducted before an audience that was always watching, always calculating, always ready to withdraw its loyalty the moment the performance faltered. The wealthy of antiquity didn't relax. They performed relaxation, which is different. And underneath all the marble and the wine and the morning crowds and the engineered jaw drops was the same thing that keeps people up at night today, the fear that it could all be gone by morning.